speaking live.
Cholera, African pig plague, and other deathly lethal pathogens. And now they are trying to mop up the evidence of this program. But we have every reason to believe that next to Russia, in Ukraine, next to Russian borders, they were basically creating components for a biological weapon. And our numerous warns that such developments poses direct threat to the safety of Russia. They were rejected by Ukraine and by their patrons from the US. And they did it in a very brazen way. So we have exerted all ways to resolve the matter peacefully. The problem that occurred not by our fault, and in this regard, we were forced to launch this special military operation. The Russian troops near Kiev, near other Ukrainian cities, has nothing to do with our intention to occupy the country. That's not our objective. And I said that directly during my address on February 24th. As for the tactics that was devised by the General Staff, by the Defense Ministry, it justified itself completely. And our fellows, our guys, soldiers and officers, they prove to be courageous and brave. They do everything that depends on them to avoid casualties among civilians in the Ukrainian cities. I would like to say, for the first time in the very beginning of the operation, the Kyiv authorities, via different channels, we were suggesting not to have any hostilities, but to withdraw the troops from Donbass, to avoid the bloodshed. They didn't want to, and that was their decision. And understanding of what is happening in real time on the ground, they will come to this understanding. The operation is unfolding successfully in strict accordance to the plan that we have devised. And Ukraine, prompted by the United States and a number of the Western countries, they were preparing to this armed scenario, to the ethnic cleansing in Donbass. The large-scale assault on Donbass and Crimea was just a matter of time. And our armed forces, they undermined these plans. They prevented these plans. In Kyiv, they didn't just prepare for war against Russia, against Donbass. They have started this war a long time ago, and they were trying to start terrorist underground there. For years, they continued hostilities in Donbass. They were shelling civilian cities and towns. Almost 14,000 civilians were killed, children among them. On March 14th, as you know, they launched a missile on downtown Donetsk. That was a terrorist attack that killed more than 20 people. And such shelling are continuing for days. They aim without any discrimination, all the squares, like fascists during the last days of their resistance. They want to drag into their graves as many civilians as possible. But what is utterly cynical, not only the blatant lies and statements and claims that it was Russia that launched a missile in Donetsk, but more cynical is that the so-called civilized Western world, European and US media, they didn't even notice this tragedy in Donetsk, as if it didn't happen. And that's how they were looking away for the last 8 years, when mothers in Donbass were burying their children, when they were killing elderly people. That's a degradation, moral degradation. This kind of torturing of people in Donbass, we couldn't tolerate that anymore. To put an end to this genocide, Russia recognized People's Republic of Donbass. We signed an agreement on assistance and friendship. Based on this agreement, republics went for military help to Russia to help them, and we gave them this help. We had no right to do otherwise. And I would like to draw your attention to the following. If our troops were only acting in the People's Republic, we could have liberated our land. That wouldn't have been the end of it. It wouldn't have brought peace or eliminated the threat for Russia. But no, we would have a new front line along the borders of Donbass. They would have continued shelling and provocations, and this armed conflict would have been endless, because there would be revanchism and hysteria from Ukraine, and the NATO military structures would have been deployed even faster and in more aggressive fashion. We would face the fact that the lethal weapons of the alliance would be at our borders. Once again, I would like to say that we had no other way to defend ourselves, to ensure the security of Russia, other than launching special military operation. And all the objectives of this operation will be achieved. We are going to ensure security of Russia and our people, and we would not allow Ukraine to become a stronghold for aggressive action against our country. It is a principled matter for Russia, for the future of our country, about neutral status, about demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. We have been ready. We are ready now to talk about it, to discuss it. Our country did everything it could to have these negotiations, to organize these negotiations, because we understood that we should have every chance to save people's lives. But time and time again, we get convinced that the Ukrainian regime that got the task of creating aggressive anti-Russia, but they're Western patrons. These Western patrons, they don't care about the fates of the people. They don't care that hundreds of people are dying, that millions of people are becoming refugees, that people who are holding hostages by neo-Nazis or delinquents released from the prisons, they don't care about this humanitarian catastrophe. And it is obvious to us that these Western patrons, they are pushing Kievan authorities to continue this bloodshed. They are getting supplied new weapons, they are getting intel information, and they are getting other kinds of aid. They get military instructors and mercenaries from abroad. And they choose economical, financial, trade and other kinds of sanctions against Russia as their weapon. And European and American people are getting hit by these sanctions because the price for gas are growing. For food, the jobs are lost because of these sanctions against Russia. And you shouldn't put the blame on anyone else. You shouldn't accuse our country about everything. I want ordinary people from the West, hear me. They try to convince you that all these difficulties that you face is the result of some hostile actions by Russia, that you have to pay out of your pocket to fight this alleged Russian threat. That's a lie. And the truth is that the current problems that millions of people in the West are facing is the result of many years of policies perpetrated by the Western leaders, Western states. Their mistakes, their ambitions. These people do not think about improving the lives of their own citizens in the Western countries. They are obsessed with income, with their own profits, with their own interests. And we have data from international organizations that show that social problems, even in the leading Western countries, have exacerbated in recent years. There is more inequality, there is a bigger chasm between poor and rich. We see more and more racial and ethnic conflicts. This myth about Western society, about this so-called golden billion is getting destroyed. Now the entire planet has to pay for the ambitions of the West, for their attempts by any means to preserve their domination in the world that is slipping away. These sanctions is the consequence of irresponsible policies of the central banks and the governments of the US and the European Union countries, because they have increased this inflation and it increased the inequality. And we have more and more refugees, influx of refugees all around the world. And who is going now to be responsible for the millions of the starving people in the poorest countries of the world because of the deficit of foodstuff? A heavy blow was dealt against the global economy and trade. The trust for the dollar was undermined. And this illegitimate action to freeze some assets of the Central Bank of Russia, now crossing out the so-called first-class high-rate assets. Both the US and EU basically announced the default regarding their obligations towards Russia. Now everyone knows that any assets could be basically stolen at any moment, and seeing that many countries in the near future could start, and I'm confident that's how it's going to be. They are going to convert their digital and fiat assets into raw materials, into land, into foodstuffs, gold, or other material assets to increase the deficit in these markets. It will increase the deficit. And arresting these asset accounts of the companies, of individuals, it's a good lesson for everyone, because you should invest in your own country. And I have said that on many occasions, because despite the pressure by the US and their vassals, I would like to thank the companies that continue to work in our country. In the future, they will get additional opportunities to develop. And we also know those who betrayed cowardly their partners. They forgot about their responsibilities towards their clients and towards their employees. They just wanted to get some alleged dividends by joining anti-Russian campaign. And unlike foreign states, we are going to respect their properties here. And I would like to emphasize, we need to understand clearly that the new package of sanctions and restrictions against us would have followed at any case, under any scenario. Our military operation in Ukraine is just an excuse for the West to impose new sanctions. Yes, now they are more concentrated. But that's how it happened after the referendum in Crimea. That happened on March 16, 2013, 8 years ago, when Crimea people, Sevastopol people made a free choice to rejoin their historic homeland. We are talking about mere excuses, about containment policies, about making Russia weaker via economic isolation and blockade. That's a long-term strategy of the West. And the leaders of the West are not even hiding that the sanctions are aimed not against companies or certain individuals. They want to deal a blow on our entire economy, on our social, humanitarian areas, on every family, every citizen of Russia. These steps are taken to make lives of millions of people worse, and that can be called an aggression via economic, political, information means. It's a total war, blatant war, and so-called Western Vermont, they are not shying away from saying that directly. All these words about political correctness, about private property, about freedom of speech, in a moment, it all disappeared. Even Olympic principles were trampled upon. They even wanted to deal this blow against Paralympians using this kind of approach, this kind of policy. In a lot of Western countries, a lot of people are getting harassed against just because they are from Russia. They are being refused to give medical care. They are losing jobs. They forbid Russian music, culture, literature. They want to cancel Russia. And now we can see the true face of the West. They are showing their true nature. And we can compare it with anti-Semitic pogroms perpetrated by Germans in 1930s. And they were trying to... A lot of European countries joined the Hitler aggression during the